How to manage vulnerability strategically. I will share with you 9 lessons on how to make peace with yourself and how to position yourself effectively in critical situations. You can expect many valuable insights, psychological, philosophical, and practical. But before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it with someone who's going through a tough time, or leave a comment on what you liked or disliked. Now, much of what I will say challenges the common belief that vulnerability is strength, courage, emotion, or a superpower. These statements are not only untrue, but they can also be harmful. Because when we are vulnerable, we are already going through facing difficulty. And the last thing we want is confusing ideas that blur the clear line between what helps us and what harms us. To clear this noise of the modern take on vulnerability, we'll start by defining what vulnerability really is. But to understand that definition, I will first show you and in fact prove to you that it is your relationship with yourself that causes most, if not all, of your vulnerabilities. Yes, most, if not all, of your vulnerabilities are caused by you. This is good news because that means you can do something about it. You can manage it strategically. So let's first evaluate your relationship with yourself. Let's take a look at how you see yourself, because there are 3 options. Which of the 3 pairs in this image do you think is least vulnerable and why? Another way to ask is, which pair do you think is most confident and why? The core of your vulnerabilities is centered around the answer to this question. It is glaringly obvious which pair is most vulnerable and least confident, the one in the middle. But which of the 2 pairs on either side, left or right, is least vulnerable and most confident, and why? Because your take on self-confidence drives your vulnerabilities, and your vulnerabilities impact your confidence. Thus, it's important that you pause this video right now and answer this question to yourself, then continue the video. Most people think that the best option in life is to project this super confident image of the pair on the right. They look sharp, attractive, powerful, sexy, but that's not self-confidence. That's self-inflation, self-bubble, and bubbles always bursts eventually. And quite often, I argue microbursts happen daily. Triggers are many: bad review, a missed promotion, aging, partner leaves, someone cuts them off in traffic. The moment reality reminds them that they're not as exceptional as they think, they collapse onto the middle mirror. They deflate. This back and forth, inflation, deflation, repeat, is the hamster wheel of addiction to self-confidence, addiction to approval, performance, image. And it's exhausting. It makes people fragile, reactive, dependent, and vulnerable. But there's another trap. One trap is how we see ourselves. The other trap is how we see others. How do you think people in the rightmost mirror see others? As equals? Or there's a slight chance of that. They likely see others as less than themselves, or far less than themselves. How do you think the people in the middle see other people? Likely as better, or far better than themselves. Both views are distortions, and both views cause vulnerability. But psychological resilience comes from psychological literacy, and literacy comes from a clear, balanced view of reality. But where does clear, balanced view of reality come from? Just like walking and running require both legs, mental resilience and clarity requires both: full acceptance of yourself and full acceptance of others. This means properly evaluating your and others' strengths and flaws, which means neither elevating to pedestal yourself or others, like on the rightmost mirror, nor having contempt for yourself or others, like in the middle mirror. This inflation-deflation interchange happens to almost all, if not all, people in nearly all areas of life. Thus, master unconditional acceptance of self and others, and vulnerability will be rare, brief, mild, and thus manageable. So what is behind this never-ending quest and need for self-confidence in the mirrors on the right and in the middle? Behind it is the belief that we're not enough, that we're not worthy enough, that our worth is, as a human being, is low. So we try to compensate. We try to run away from this extremely uncomfortable feeling of self-worthlessness. In fact, these beliefs of fragile self-worth, unhealthy emotions that stem from it, and the resulting bad coping with life's inevitable challenges is vulnerability. That is, your belief that you're not worthy enough generates unhealthy emotions, distorted perceptions, overly positive or negative, of yourself and others, other dysfunctional self-sabotaging behaviors, and lessens your capacity to cope with life's challenges. And these four factors are vulnerability. So the primary cause of vulnerability is your belief that you are not worthy enough. And because of that, vulnerability is a disadvantage. Not courage, not strength, and certainly not a superpower. If anything, it's a super disadvantage. This was not my definition of vulnerability. This was definition of psychological vulnerability, and there are many studies for it. This next slide shows two sources and their scientific findings. You can see the sources at the bottom of this slide. Let me paraphrase their findings. Vulnerability arises and is a result of this disadvantageous belief of conditional self-worth. What is conditional self-worth? It is a belief or condition that we torture ourselves with, that we are worthy only if we perform in a certain way, usually in an incredibly superior way, or that we are worthy only if others approve of us, or we burden ourselves with some other irrational and unsustainable condition. This makes our self-worth fragile, and because of this and other irrational beliefs, not only do we engage in self-sabotaging behaviors like extremely unrealistic self-criticism, perfectionism, workaholism, approval-seeking, and so on, but we also get unhealthy emotions like anxiety, rage, depression, hurt, and so on. All that undermines our capacity to cope with tough situations. We feel less protected, more dependent, and so on. And all that defines vulnerability. Thus, vulnerability, and I'm quoting the study now, is a disadvantage that renders people less protected when facing an array of negative life experiences. People have challenged this concept, arguing that this is not the vulnerability being discussed in the mainstream media, that this is not discussing the modern view and take and definition of vulnerability. But note, there is no clear modern definition of vulnerability, which will be evident in the next slides. But before we move on, note that psychological vulnerability is used in psychometric testing, which employers often use to determine suitability of candidates for certain jobs and positions. Thus, what we are discussing here is not only beneficial for your mental health, it is also at the core of that part of mental balance that makes you either the right or the wrong candidate for certain or many jobs. Now, compare this scientific approach to vulnerability with the modern take on vulnerability in the next slides. Thank you for watching. This is the end of the first video. If this helped you see vulnerability in a clearer way, stay with me, because in the next one, we'll tackle one of the biggest misconceptions, the idea that vulnerability is your strength. We'll separate truth from harm, so please spread the truth. Share and subscribe, like and comment, and I'll see you in the next video just on the right. Left. No, right.